At approximately 9 p.m. on the evening of the 21st of June 1941, a group of soldiers stationed near the border between Germany and the Soviet Union noticed something strange in the waters of the Bug River. What could have simply been their eyes deceiving them was in actual fact a man swimming towards them from the other side. The Soviet soldiers quickly readied themselves and gathered their rifles to intercept the lone swimmer, who upon reaching the shore introduced himself as Alfred Liskow. Mr. Liskow too was a soldier and now apparently a deserter from the German army with a message for any ears that may wish to listen. His message was dire and grave, in which he spoke of an incoming attack from his former countrymen at 4 a.m. the following morning. For whatever reason, the soldiers, who it's quite possible to assume may not have been the brightest sparks in the Red Army, decided to ignore Mr. Liskow's warning and went back to their largely uneventful evening of whatever matters they had been attending to beforehand. However, it may have been in their interest to have taken Mr. Liskow's words with the severity that they so deserved. Just over 6 hours later, at around 3:15 a.m. on the morning of the 22nd of June, over 3 million Axis soldiers stormed across the border into the Soviet Union in a surprise attack that shook the world to its core. Although Stalin had been suspicious of Germany for quite some time in the lead-up and may have even been directly warned beforehand of an imminent attack, his slow response in the opening hours and days of the invasion showed that this had largely caught him off guard. And so, with the 3 million soldiers aided by thousands of tanks and aircraft pouring into the Soviet lands, Operation Barbarossa, the largest land invasion in history, had begun. The plans for Operation Barbarossa are believed to have started sometime in 1940. Adolf Hitler had made it clear that his new empire would need more living space for its inhabitants and resources for its war effort. The previous year, Germany and the Soviet Union had signed the Molotov-Rippentrop Pact, a non-aggression agreement set to last 10 years from its date of recognition on the 23rd of August 1939. Despite the fact on paper the Germans and Soviets were quote-unquote allies, in reality those at the top of the Nazi regime had no intention of keeping to this agreement. After all, one of the fundamentals of Nazi ideology was that the Slavs were an inferior race of people, comparable to that of the Jews in the German idealized hierarchy of racial order. And thus it was likely only a matter of time that Germany would rip apart their pact with the Soviets and look to expand their lands eastward. The opening hours and days saw the Germans advance at lightning speed across the European plains. The areas of what had been the Soviet borders and defence lines were completely smashed apart by the ground forces, and the skies quickly dominated by the air superiority of the Luftwaffe. The Soviets, having their organisational command and control completely obliterated in the first few hours, could do little initially to halt the swift advance. The order of the operation was that the invading force would commence a three-pronged attack on the Soviet Union. Army Group North were tasked with taking Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg. Army Group South would advance on Kiev in Ukraine, and Army Group Centre's objective was Moscow, in which to destroy the Soviet government. By the end of August, Germany had acquired new gained territory stretching from modern-day Estonia all the way down to the Black Sea, an area so vast and expansive and achieved in such a short time frame that it stunned even the regime leaders themselves. However, by the autumn of 1941, the initial momentum of the German division slowed down dramatically. A combination of unfavourable weather conditions, logistical issues, and a stiffening Red Army defence meant that the invaders began facing problems. Downpours and rainstorms turned tracks and pathways into swamps, meaning tanks and other armoured vehicles started getting stuck in the thick layers of mud. The large areas covered by the Germans also began to play against them, as keeping the men on the front lines properly equipped and supplied became ever more difficult. And finally, by this time the Red Army had begun seriously fighting back with increasing effectiveness as to put the Germans' tactics to the test. A prime example of this were the battles for the city of Smolensk, situated en route to Moscow, which had been captured by the Germans in July, but later liberated by the Soviets in September. Nevertheless, by the end of September, with the siege of Leningrad underway and Kiev captured and occupied by Army Group South, Army Group Centre was ready to begin its long-anticipated assault on the Soviet capital. In Part 2, we'll look at the infamous Battle of Moscow that took place in the winter of 1941 and early 1942, so be sure to stay tuned for that one. A quick note to mention before we end is that the opening part of this video is a largely fictionalised retelling of the meeting between Alfred Liskow and the soldiers at the German-Soviet border, and that this was not the only occasion in which the looming invasion of Operation Barbarossa was realised by the Soviet Union. And of course, thank you to all viewers and subscribers, and I'll see you on the next video.